So we're in the Ten Commandments, and in Exodus chapter 20, verse 20, Moses makes it very clear the intention of the law is not to make people righteous, to make people sinless. Instead, the intention of the law is to test the people, to develop a fear of God within the people. And after that fear of God develops in the people, that fear of God will actually keep people from sinning. So when the people read the law, they are not to treat it as a checklist. Instead, they are to ask, who is God? And after asking who is God and seeing how that law is rooted in the creation, in response, they ask, how do I live my life in response to who God is? And this is how we think in relation to sin. Other than that, the law is the national law of a people group. We are not Israel. So we ask, who is God? In response to who God is, we say, how do I then live my life? There's an instruction in the Ten Commandments, a command in the law of Israel for the people not to commit idolatry, not to form any idols and not to make any images, not to worship those idols, because God alone is God. If the people were to give themselves over to idolatry, God says he will visit their iniquities, the iniquities of the fathers, upon their children to the third and fourth generation. But if the people love God, God will visit his loving kindness to the 1,000th generation of those who love him. Now, here, since we're studying biblical manhood and womanhood, I want to look particularly at the difference of God's treatment between the men and the women. Specifically concerning idolatry. If the men are idolatrous, if they craft idols, if they worship idols, even like if they are worshiping something other than God that they have not crafted, I don't know, like their own identities, like their own lusts, like their own desires, okay, so it applies. There's some application to be made here. God will visit the iniquities of the fathers upon the third and fourth generation because they hate him. Idolatry is equivalent to hate in this text. Now, we look at how this rule, this law is connected to God, how it comes from the character of God. God is holy. There are no other gods. God is worthy of worship. That is who he is, how it is rooted in the creation. God is the one who created us. He created us to be his image upon the earth, and how it applies today. Worship the only true God, follow him, obey him. Okay, so this is a moral law. It applies the same to us as it did for national Israel under Moses. Do not have any idols. Do not worship any idols. No graven images. When we think about what it means for God to visit the iniquities of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generation, I want to notice something here. God puts men directly in view, fathers directly in view, like it is the father's responsibility to lead his household in the faith, to raise his children and the nurture and the admonition of the Lord, to teach his children to honor God and to reject idols. That responsibility here it's placed upon the father, because if the father doesn't do that, if he doesn't lead by example and raise his children in this way, the Lord will visit the iniquities of the father upon the third and fourth generation of those who hate him. So we see like a traditional model here where a man is actually the head of his household. It's a man's responsibility to lead in the home, which carries over to society and carries over into the church, even though the church didn't exist then, right? The principles carry over. And this is why we support a traditional model, a complementarian model as Christians, as those who read the Bible and who know God. Now, I think about what it means for God to visit the iniquities of the father upon his children if the father hates him. I think the principle carries over today. I think the reason society is in such a mess is because men have failed to be good fathers. Okay, I think the responsibility is on men, and I think men have in large part failed in modern society, to raise their children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, to get their children to church, to be part of the church community, the church body, but then also to disciple their children at home and to lead by example for the household as a whole. My father is a man who does not love God. My biological father is a man who does not love God. And his addiction to alcohol and later drugs, and his constantly being in and out of prison, are the result of his hatred for God. He has idolatrized his own desires, his own feelings. He has made an idol of himself. And as an adult, I am still affected by his sin. Now, I think ultimately God visiting the iniquities of the fathers upon the third and fourth generation of those who hate him, I think ultimately this is an act of grace from God. It is in large part because of my father's hatred for God that God, I think, intervenes, right? Visits my father's iniquities on me. I get to see and feel the effects of his sin, of his unrighteousness, of his hatred for God, which is equivalent to idolatry, right? So hatred isn't like this, oh my gosh, gnash my teeth at God, and so always acting. No, it's just a simple idolatry, right? But I get to see the effects of that. And because I get to see the effects of that, I then have an opportunity to turn to God. A great generation of people today in the United States have seen the hatred our fathers have had toward God. And our fathers include the nation's leaders. Our fathers include those in generations before us, in this exodus away from godly things, even within the church. And we see that and we say, I don't want that. Things turn out really badly when society turns away from God. I am feeling the effects of that. I don't like it. And so I have the opportunity then for revival, and God is doing that work. I think it's ultimately an act of grace so that God may bring the next generation to himself, even if their fathers fail. Okay? And then we see this promise, which includes the women, right? God will show his loving kindness to the 1,000th generation of those who love him. An inclusive term. This doesn't just depend on the fathers. It isn't just a promise for the fathers. So the responsibility is placed upon the fathers, but the promise belongs to all people. And remember, the woman is the crown of creation. She represents the world, humanity in relationship to God. The man represents God in relationship to his creation and to humanity, which is why such the responsibility is placed upon the man in this text, and why the woman receives absolute grace in this text, because she is the object of divine love in this living parable we call marriage between men and women. Now, men, we need to experience revival in our time. We need to learn what it means to love God and to reject idolatry and to raise our families as fine Christian men and women. Because I don't want my son to have to feel the effects of my sin. I want to love God. And I want society to prosper, and that doesn't happen until the nation returns to God. And men, it is to us to lead the way. And women, remember, you are equal to men. We just paint different pictures in the way that we relate to one another. And I'm so glad that we have godly women as suitable helpers in this endeavor. May we raise our children well. May we see revival in the next generation.